The wind in Winterfell had always whispered things Jon Snow couldn't understand. But this time it wasn't just the wind. It was his father's voice, low, steady, but heavy with something Jon had never heard before. Not fear, not anger. Something colder. Something final. Jon stood at the edge of the Godswood, the snow falling lightly around him, his hands clenched tight as Ned Stark finished speaking. The words didn't echo. They sank into the ground like blood into snow. "She is the last dragon," Ned said, looking ahead into the weirwood tree, his face unreadable. "And if she rises, the realm will burn." Jon's heart kicked in his chest. He wanted to believe he'd misheard, that his father meant something else. But those eyes, they didn't blink. They didn't waver. And in them, Jon saw no doubt. "Only duty. You want me to kill her?" Jon's voice cracked, not from fear, but from disbelief. "She's just a girl. She's done nothing." "She will," Ned said. A silence passed between them, thick and sharp. The snow crunched under Jon's boots as he shifted. He thought of Robb, of Arya, of the warmth of the Great Hall. This wasn't that. This was something darker. Something that would never be spoken of again. "She has no army," Jon tried. "No dragons?" "She's hiding across the sea." "What threat could she—" "She has a name," Ned cut in. "Targaryen." "That's all she needs." Jon looked away. He wasn't a killer. Not like that. Not for a girl he'd never met. But he wasn't just Jon Snow either. He was a Stark of Winterfell, and if his father, the most honorable man in the Seven Kingdoms, was saying this had to be done, then maybe honor meant something else now, something dirtier. "She's in Essos," Jon said. "With her brother." Ned nodded slowly. "Viserys is a fool. He'll get himself killed trying to buy a crown. But Daenerys, she listens. She waits. That's the dangerous one." Jon swallowed hard. His mind raced. He imagined this girl with silver hair, no older than Arya, sitting somewhere by a fire. She didn't know he existed. She didn't know her name had made her a target. "I'll need a ship," Jon said after too long. "You'll have one," Ned replied, though his voice was colder now. As if the moment Jon agreed, a part of his soul turned to stone. The next morning, Jon was gone before the sun rose. No goodbyes. No explanations. Only a sealed letter in Maester Luwin's hand, addressed to the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, a cover. A distraction. He wasn't going to the wall. He was going to kill a girl he'd never met. The sea was cruel, and it suited Jon's mood perfectly. He barely slept. When he did, he saw her, the girl with the silver hair, and she was always smiling. Not cruelly, not wickedly, just soft, innocent. The kind of smile that made everything worse. Across the narrow sea, Daenerys was preparing for a wedding she didn't want. Viserys barked commands and threats, and Illyrio whispered poison in their ears. But she said nothing. She obeyed. She smiled when told. She dressed when ordered, and each night she prayed she wouldn't wake up. Jon docked in Pentos under the name Eamon Waters, a bastard merchant's son looking for work. His sword stayed hidden. His eyes stayed open. He asked no questions, but he watched everything, especially her. It didn't take long to find her, the Khaleesi-to-be, a girl walking like she carried the weight of empires on her shoulders, her hair like moonlight, her face too young for the things placed upon it. He followed her from a distance, never seen. She didn't look like a threat. She looked like someone trying to survive, but the voice of his father echoed louder each day. She will burn the world to rule it. He thought it was just paranoia, old war scars, the ghosts of Robert's rebellion, until he saw what Daenerys was marrying into, Khal Drogo. The Dothraki wedding was a storm of violence and lust. Jon watched from the shadows as men died for fun, women were taken in the open, and the drums never stopped. The look on Daenerys' face was frozen, not in fear but in numbness, and when she stood beside the Khal, when the silver crown was placed upon her head, something changed. It wasn't big, but Jon saw it, a flicker of resolve, like a spark in dry grass. Just a hint of fire. That was the moment he started to believe his father might have been right, but even so, his sword remained sheathed. Days passed. He watched her adjust. Not thrive, not yet, but change. She stopped flinching. She started asking questions. She stopped following Viserys' orders. She began riding her silver mare alone. And then one day she laughed, and it was that moment that nearly broke Jon, because it wasn't a conqueror's laugh. It wasn't mad or cruel or arrogant. It was soft, real, like a girl who'd remembered what joy was after forgetting it existed. He sat that night by the sea, staring at the waves. The sword lay beside him, clean, useless. And his thoughts were louder than ever. He could do it. He could sneak into her tent while she bathed, slip the blade between her ribs, end it before anything ever began. The Dothraki would blame an enemy tribe. Her brother would be too drunk to care. It would be easy, too easy, but his hands wouldn't move. Instead, he asked himself questions, dangerous ones. What if she could be different? What if she had the strength to change things? What if she wasn't a monster? What if... His father was wrong. That night, Daenerys dreamed of snow. A boy standing in the dark, eyes like a wolf, blade like ice. She woke up shaking. The next morning, Jon made a decision. He would confront her, not as an assassin, as himself. He needed to see who she was, not just through shadows and whispers. Face to face. If she was a danger, he would know. If not, he didn't finish the thought. He waited until her guards wandered off, until the night was quiet and the fire in her tent was low. He moved like a ghost, each step lighter than the last. Her tent was open, the silk flapping slightly in the wind. A shadow moved inside. Jon stepped forward and stopped, because Daenerys was staring straight at him, not shocked. Not afraid, she said nothing. Just tilted her head slightly like she'd been expecting him, and maybe she had. Jon's breath caught. The blade stayed at his side, but something else unsheathed between them. Silence, tension, recognition. "You're not one of them," she said softly, her voice like warm wind. "Who are you?" Jon opened his mouth, but he didn't know the answer anymore. And in that moment, something broke in both of them. Not trust, but fate, and neither of them would ever escape it again. He should have walked away. That was the only thought in Jon's mind as he stood there, eyes locked with Daenerys Targaryen. The fire behind her cast her face in golden shadow, dancing like it knew something he didn't. She didn't flinch, didn't scream, didn't call for guards, and Jon, he couldn't even breathe. "I asked you a question," she said again, softer this time. "Who are you?" His hand twitched near his belt. Not for his blade, not anymore. Just instinct. "Something to ground himself, Jon," he muttered. "A Jon Snow." The name meant nothing to her. He saw it on her face. No flicker of recognition, no fear, no curiosity. Just silence, like she was trying to see through the skin, into the bone. She stepped forward, not cautiously, just slow, measured, like she'd already decided he wouldn't harm her. "You're not Dothraki. You're not Pentoshi," she said, eyeing his clothes, his posture, the subtle stiffness of a soldier trying to act like a traveler. "So you've been following me." Jon didn't deny it. He couldn't. The lie would taste too bitter. "I thought you might be dangerous," he said. Her lips curled, not into a smile, but something close to it. "Not amused, not mocking, just tired. Everyone says that," she whispered, "even before they meet me." Jon's pulse throbbed in his neck. This wasn't what he came for. He'd imagined it so many times. A swift strike, a clean escape, or maybe a tense confrontation. Her yelling, him striking, some chaos to bury the guilt. But not this, not calm, not stillness, not eyes like storm clouds waiting to burst. "I don't want to hurt you," he said. "But you came here with a sword," she replied. She stepped aside, and for a moment Jon thought she might be offering him the chance. A clean target. Her back to the fire, chest open, no guards near. "If it needs to be done, then do it," she said, barely above a whisper. Jon flinched. "Why would you say that?" Daenerys looked down at her hands. Small, delicate. No rings, no power, just skin, dusted with ash and oil from the fire. "Because men like you only show up for one reason," she said, "and I'm tired of running from it." He studied her, really studied her. There was no madness in her eyes, no fury, just weariness, the kind that settles in the bones, the kind that only comes from knowing you're being shaped by forces you can't control. "I was sent to kill you," he said finally. The air seemed to stop. Even the fire crackled quieter. Her shoulders rose, then fell. No panic, no shock. "By who?" she asked. He hesitated. "My father." She blinked. "Your father thinks I'm that much of a threat?" Jon nodded. Daenerys laughed, short, breathless, humorless. It sounded almost like a sob. "I'm a girl married off to a savage horse lord to please a brother who beats me," she said. "Tell me, How does that threaten the mighty men of Westeros? Jon didn't answer. Because he didn't have one. She walked toward him then, slow and deliberate. He didn't move. Not when she was 2 feet away. Not when she was close enough that he could feel the heat of her skin against his. "Are you going to do it?" she asked, eyes boring into his. Jon looked down at the hilt of his sword, then back up at her. "No," she exhaled, not in relief. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was more like someone accepting they'd been wrong about everything. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Neither are you," Jon replied. He turned to leave, but before he could step out of the tent, her voice stopped him. "If you're not here to kill me, then what now?" Jon paused, his breath visible in the cool night air. There was no plan beyond this point. "No next step, I don't know," he said, and then he left. For the next 3 days he avoided her. Not out of guilt. Out of confusion. He hadn't failed. He'd chosen. That was the part that haunted him. Ned Stark's raven came on the 4th day. It was short, coded and brutal. "She has wed. Eliminate the threat now, no mercy." And Jon crumpled the note in his hand, heart thudding hard against his ribs. That same night Viserys died. He didn't die quietly. He screamed, begged, clawed, and in the end his screams were drowned out by the sound of molten gold sizzling on bone. Jon watched from a distance, hidden in the shadows of the camp. No one mourned. Not even Daenerys, but she didn't smile either. She just turned away from her brother's corpse and whispered something in Dothraki. That night, the whispers started. "She is Khaleesi now. She rides better than a blood rider. The fire does not touch her," and Jon knew. It had begun. The next morning she sought him out. He was sharpening his sword by the edge of the river. She stood silently for a while, just watching him. "You saw it?" she asked. He nodded. "Does it scare you?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Yes," he said. She stepped closer. "Then you should leave, because I'm not going to stop. You're not afraid?" He asked. "I was," she said. "Every day of him. Of Drogo. Of what I might become. But I'm done being afraid." Jon stood. "What are you becoming?" Her eyes didn't blink. "Something that cannot be killed." They stared at each other for a long time, and in that silence 1,000 things were said. She knew he'd been sent to end her. He knew she wouldn't let anyone ever try again. And somehow, despite everything, they didn't hate each other for it. That night Jon wrote a letter to Ned Stark. He didn't say much. Only this: "The fire has already started. Killing her now would only feed it. You were right about the danger, but wrong about the girl." He sealed it, handed it to a trusted courier, and watched it disappear into the horizon. The next day, Daenerys approached him with a proposition. "If you're done spying," she said, "I could use someone who knows how to fight and lie." Jon raised an eyebrow. "You trust me?" "No," she said, "but I understand you. And that's more than I can say for most." He thought of Winterfell, of Ned's eyes, of honor and duty and the line between them slowly rotting. "I'll stay," Jon said, "but not for you." She didn't ask for an explanation, but the truth was simple. He was staying because he needed to see what she would become, and whether or not he'd still have to kill her in the end. The sun rose hotter in Essos than in the north. It didn't ask permission before burning your skin. It didn't care for titles, banners, or the blood of old kings. Jon Snow learned that quickly. Sweat soaked his shirt before noon. Dust clung to his boots like guilt. And all around him, the Dothraki shouted in a language that didn't welcome him. He was the outsider, the spy who didn't strike, the man who rode in silence behind a queen he wasn't sure he could follow, and definitely couldn't control. Daenerys didn't speak to him for days after he agreed to stay. She didn't need to. Her actions spoke louder than words. She rode every morning, trained with the Khalasar, learned the language, studied their customs. Viserys' shadow had vanished, and in its place something far more dangerous had taken root. Respect. They called her blood of my blood now, not in jest, not as a courtesy. In truth, Jon watched the shift happen like a slow storm. One rider pledged himself to her, then 5, then 20. She didn't command it, they offered. Her power didn't scream. It whispered, coiled, and waited. He should have left. He told himself that every morning just before the sun crested over the hill and the smell of horse sweat and fire filled the air. He should have turned his horse west, back to the coast. found the next ship back to Westeros, but he didn't, because something worse than loyalty had taken root inside him. Curiosity, and maybe something else. "You're still here," Ser Jorah said one night, voice low as he sipped watered wine beside Jon outside the edge of the camp. Jon didn't answer. Jorah eyed him. "You were watching her even before you joined us." "I saw you." "She knew," Jon replied. "She always knows," Jorah said almost proudly. Jon studied the night, the shame on his face hidden behind quiet devotion. "You love her," Jon said flatly. Jorah's jaw tensed. "Not the way you're thinking." Jon didn't push it. He didn't need to. There was no jealousy between them, no rivalry. Just two men circling a storm neither could control. "I was sent to kill her," Jon said, voice just above a whisper. Jorah looked at him for a long moment, and Jon half expected the older man to draw steel. But he didn't. "You're not the first," Jorah said. "You won't be the last." And then he stood and walked off into the dark. Jon didn't sleep that night. The next morning Daenerys summoned him. She didn't offer greetings or pleasantries. She stood in the center of the camp, surrounded by Dothraki warriors, and she pointed at a horse. "Ride with me," she said. Jon mounted without a word. They rode far, beyond the grassy plains, beyond the scouting lines. They stopped only when the land grew cracked and dry, where nothing bloomed. "This is where Drogo plans to ride next," she said, her voice strange, somewhere between excitement and dread. Jon scanned the dead land. "There's nothing here." "There will be," she said. "Slaves, spoils, cities to burn." He turned to her sharply. "So you're not okay with that?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she dismounted and walked across the cracked soil, her fingers trailing across the brittle earth. "I was supposed to be a queen of Westeros," she said. "But I never saw a single stone of my birthright. Now I'm Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea, and I've seen more death than most kings." Jon dismounted too. "Then don't follow Drogo's warpath. You have enough of your own," she laughed bitterly. "And go where, Jon Snow?" "To Westeros with what? I have no ships, no allies. Only savages the Seven Kingdoms will fear the moment they see us." Jon looked at her, the silver in her hair catching the sun. "You think Westeros will welcome you with open arms?" "No," she said, "but they will remember my name." He took a step closer. "They'll remember fire and blood, if that's what you bring." She met his eyes then. "Not cold, not cruel, just tired and determined." "What would you have me do?" she asked. "Lie down and wait for death. Wait for Robert Baratheon's men to find me and finish the job you didn't." The words stung. He didn't flinch, but his chest tightened. "You don't have to be your father's daughter," Jon said. "And you don't have to be your father's weapon," she snapped back. Silence again, the kind that spoke volumes. "I'm not trying to conquer the world," she said softly. "I'm trying to survive it." Jon looked out across the dead land, and for the first time he believed her. But belief wasn't enough. That night Khal Drogo returned to camp with blood on his hands and fire in his voice. He spoke of conquest, not just villages but cities. He wanted the Iron Throne now, for his son. For her, and Daenerys listened. Jon saw the shift, the hunger. Not in Drogo, in her it started small. A question, a suggestion, a plan, then it became strategy, timing, logistics. She was no longer surviving, she was becoming. Jorah noticed it too. "She's not like him," he said to Jon one night. "She'll never be him." "She's not him," Jon replied. "But she's something else now. Something worse? I don't know yet." Then the news came, a rider from the east. A city had fallen, burned, women taken, children enslaved. All in Drogo's name and Daenerys's. She denied giving the order, but she didn't stop it either. That night Jon went to her tent again. No blade this time. "Just questions. You said you wanted to survive," he said. "But you're not just surviving anymore. You're winning. You're burning. You're becoming what they feared." She didn't rise to anger. She didn't lash out. She just stared at him. "I gave them a future," she said. "The city took slaves. We freed them by killing everyone who didn't surrender," Jon said. "They had their chance." Jon stepped forward. "So did you." Her breath caught, and then she stepped past him, slowly, stopping just inches from his side. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, "but I won't apologize for surviving." He closed his eyes. "I know." And for one terrifying second, they almost kissed, but neither of them moved, because somewhere, deep down, they both knew what this was. Not love, not yet, just two broken weapons, trying to decide whether they were enemies or allies, and neither answer would save them. The raven arrived before dawn, black wings beating against the sky like a warning. Jon saw it circle once before landing on the wooden post outside his tent. Its eyes glinted, too sharp for a mere bird. The letter tied to its leg bore the Stark seal. Wax cracked slightly. From the heat of Essos, Jon untied it with numb fingers. He didn't need to open it. He already knew what it would say, but he read it anyway. You failed to act. She marches west. If blood spills, it is on your hands now. Return, or do what you were sent for. And no, my son, no with honor, just steel words on thin parchment. And beneath every line, disappointment that weighed heavier than chainmail. He didn't burn the letter. That would be too clean. Instead, he folded it and slid it into his boot, close to skin where the shame could keep bleeding through. Across camp, drums echoed low and steady. Dothraki warriors sharpened blades, fed horses, packed saddlebags. The entire Khalasar was moving. Not just scouting. Not raiding, marching to war. Daenerys had convinced Drogo. Westeros was no longer a dream. It was a promised land. One she would take, not beg for, not inherit, take. And behind her rode death on hooves. She hadn't summoned Jon that morning. She didn't need to. Her message had already been sent, wrapped in gold, sealed in fire, and carried by the steps of 1,000 riders thundering west. Jon stood in place, the letter digging into his ankle, watching the whirlwind he'd chosen not to stop. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted to. That evening, Daenerys finally came to him. No guards. No riders, just her. She looked tired. Not physically. Soul-deep. As if even victory tasted bitter now. I know about the letter, she said quietly. Jon didn't look surprised. Of course you do. I don't blame you. He raised an eyebrow. You don't? You were sent to kill me. You didn't. That makes you mine now, whether you like it or not. The way she said it wasn't possessive. It was honest. Like she wasn't sure whether she was claiming an ally or a liability. Maybe both. Jon didn't answer. She stepped closer. They won't let me come home, Jon. You know that. You still think Westeros is your home? It's my name, she said. That's all I have left. Jon stared at her for a long moment. Then, with something like resignation, he said, And what happens when you get there? You think they'll kneel? They will when they see what I've become, he sighed. And if they don't? Her silence was all the answer he needed. That night, fires were lit along the ridge. Not campfires, beacons, signal flames, warning lights for those who watched from the cities beyond the mountains. The Dothraki didn't just march. They announced themselves. Jon watched from above, high on a rocky outcrop, alone. Every heartbeat reminded him of Winterfell, of the cold, of quiet, of his father's eyes when he first gave the order, she will burn the world, and now. She might, but even as that thought stabbed through him, a worse one followed, and maybe the world deserved it. When he came down from the ridge, Daenerys was waiting. I want you beside me when we reach the narrow sea, she said. I don't ride for kings or queens. She tilted her head. But you're still here. He didn't deny it. She stepped closer. The fire behind her lit her face in gold. Not soft this time. Fierce, uncompromising, regal. I'm not asking for loyalty, she said. I'm asking for truth. Jon's throat dried. You told me once I didn't have to be my father's daughter, she continued. Maybe you don't have to be his son. The words didn't strike like a sword. They pierced like a whisper. Because for the first time, someone was offering him a choice, not duty, not blood. Choice. He didn't give her an answer. But the next day, he rode beside her, not behind, beside. The first city fell 3 days later. It wasn't a capital, just a fortified outpost with a sigil Jon didn't recognize. The Dothraki swarmed it like fire across wheat. Jon didn't fight. He didn't draw his sword. He watched. He saw Daenerys on her horse, calm, unblinking, giving no direct order, but making no move to stop it. By sunset, the gates burned. By morning, the screams had stopped. They buried the children. She insisted on that, but no one mourned the soldiers. That night, Daenerys stood alone at the edge of the broken wall, staring out into the dark. Jon approached slowly. You didn't stop them, he said. She didn't turn. Would it have mattered? Maybe not to them, he replied. But to you, she finally faced him. I gave them one warning. That city enslaved hundreds, burned fields, took tribute from starving villages. I gave them a chance. And if the next city doesn't kneel, they all will. There was no anger in her voice, just certainty, like steel cooling after being hammered into shape. John stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're changing," she nodded. "I know." He searched her face. "Into what?" She met his eyes. "Into what I was born to be." The words chilled. Him more than the North ever had, but he didn't leave, he didn't stop her, because part of him, the part that no longer believed in thrones or fathers or honor, wanted to see what came next, and he wasn't alone. Ravens were flying, now from the free cities from the west, from kings, landing to lords, queens, kings, spies. The message was clear. The Dragon Queen marches. And she does not come alone. In Winterfell, Ned Stark stood over the fire, rereading Jon's last letter, jaw clenched so tight it cracked. "She should have died before she rose," he said to no one. Then he turned to the shadows behind him. "Ready the blade." And with that, the old war began again. But this time it wouldn't be dragons versus wolves. It would be Jon Snow versus the man who made him. And Daenerys was no longer the target. She was the weapon. The docks of Volantis groaned beneath the weight of the Dothraki horde. Ships, old, stolen, and hastily repaired, lined the bay like wounded beasts. Slavers had fled. Merchants had shut their doors. The sky was bruised with smoke from 3 separate fires that no one bothered putting out. And through it all, Daenerys stood at the edge of the water, her silver hair whipping in the wind, her eyes locked on the western horizon. Westeros. It was close enough now to taste. Jon stood a few feet behind her, his arms crossed, sword at his back, eyes flicking between the terrified port workers and the eerie calm in her face. She hadn't spoken since they arrived. She didn't need to. The soldiers obeyed. The ships were being loaded. And the city's silence spoke volumes. Word had spread. The Widow Queen, they called her. She who walks with fire, who buried her brother in molten gold and made the great Khal march west. Some said she was a goddess. Others whispered she was a curse. Jon had stopped correcting them. He wasn't sure anymore if they were wrong. "You're thinking of running," she said suddenly without turning. Jon blinked. "What?" "You were quiet all morning," she said, her voice calm, almost soft. "When you get that quiet, you're either thinking of killing someone or leaving." Jon stepped up beside her, eyes on the waves. "I thought you said I was yours now." Daenerys smiled faintly. "Even wolves stray," he shook his head. "You really believe this will work? That you'll land in Westeros and they'll just bend the knee?" She didn't answer at first. Then, "No, I believe they'll resist. And I'll burn resistance to the ground." Jon didn't flinch, but inside something twisted. She said it too easily now, as if fire had become her first language. "The North won't kneel," he said. "I'm not asking them to," she replied. "I'll give them one chance. After that, it's not a request." Jon stepped in front of her, forcing her to face him. "And what happens when your flames reach Winterfell?" Her eyes didn't waver. "Then the North burns too." He stared at her. She didn't blink, and in that moment, Jon Snow knew something he hadn't wanted to admit. She was too far gone. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but the words died in his throat. Not because he didn't have them, but because they wouldn't change a thing. That night, as the ships groaned and Dothraki loaded their horses and spears, Jon slipped away into the dark. He walked past guards, past tents, through the smoke-choked streets of Volantis, until he reached the old market where a single raven waited in a cage. He unrolled the parchment. One name, just one. Ned. He hesitated only a second before dipping the quill. "She sails for Westeros." I couldn't stop her. "Prepare Winterfell. Prepare them all." He stared at the next line. He wanted to write more, but what could he say? That he was sorry? That he'd believed in her? That he still did in some twisted part of him? Instead, he wrote one last line. "If you must strike her, do it clean. She's still a girl." He tied the message, watched the bird disappear into the sky, and returned to the docks with fire in his chest and something colder in his lungs. Daenerys stood by the lead ship, cloaked in dark red, eyes glowing in torchlight. When she saw him, she didn't speak. She didn't need to. He had chosen again. On the second night at sea, a storm rolled in, as if the gods themselves were unsettled by what sailed toward their shores. Waves battered the ships. Thunder cracked the sky like it was breaking apart. Jon stood at the bow, soaked, gripping the rail. He hadn't slept, not since they left Volantis. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Winterfell, burning. Arya's face covered in soot, Sansa screaming from a tower, Ned on his knees, and behind it all Daenerys. He turned, and there she was, no hood, no cloak. Just silver hair drenched, eyes burning through the rain. "We're close," she said. Jon didn't answer. She stepped beside him. "When we land, I want you beside me when I speak to the lords." "The Stark name still means something." Jon's jaw tightened. "And if I refuse?" "Then I'll speak without it," she said, cold and certain. "And they'll listen with their bones." He turned toward her, anger creeping into his voice. "Is this what you want to be remembered for?" Her eyes narrowed. "I want to be remembered at all." Lightning split the sky. Thunder cracked like a hammer on steel. "You still think this is justice?" Jon asked. "No," she said. "Justice died with my father. This is survival." The storm carried them through the night, and by dawn they saw it. Westeros. Green hills in the distance. White cliffs. Mist curling over the coast. Daenerys didn't smile. She stepped off the ship like a queen returning to a throne no one invited her to. Jon stepped behind her. And as his boots hit Westerosi soil again, he whispered under his breath, "Forgive me," but no one heard. In King's Landing, ravens circled the towers. In the Red Keep, Varys unfurled a scroll and paled. "She's here." Cersei stood by the window, sipping wine unbothered. "Let her come," she said. "We've dealt with dragons before." "But she's not her father," Varys said carefully. "No," Cersei replied. "She's worse." North of the Neck at Winterfell, Ned Stark finished reading Jon's letter. He said nothing for a long time. Then he handed it to Robb. "Gather the bannermen." "Are we going to war?" Robb asked, voice tight. Ned looked toward the south. "We're going to stop my son before he forgets who he is. My son before he forgets who he is." The banners of the north flew high, snapping in the cold wind like warnings etched in cloth. Snow began to fall again, light at first, soft and whispering. It gathered on Ned Stark's shoulders as he rode through the gates of Moat Cailin, past soldiers who had once been boys now sharpening swords for a war they hadn't asked for. Ned hadn't spoken since they left Winterfell. Not to Robb, not to the men who had followed him without question. He wore his silence like armor. The letter from Jon still sat beneath his cloak near his heart, not out of sentiment, but because every word in it was a weight pulling him deeper into something he couldn't yet name. He remembered Jon as a boy, swinging a wooden sword with fierce eyes, desperate to prove himself. He remembered the night he first brought him to Winterfell, a bundle of blood and shame. Now that same boy had stood in front of the storm and let it pass over him. Ned had expected fire from Daenerys. He hadn't expected Jon to feed it. South of them, the storm was already spreading. Daenerys Targaryen didn't wait. She made landfall with 3,000 Dothraki riders behind her, and no patience for diplomacy. A nearby village flew Lannister banners. They surrendered before her horse even reached the gates they still burned, not by her order. But she didn't stop it either. Jon rode behind her, jaw clenched, fists at his side. He argued, quietly, firmly, but not publicly. Not yet, she heard him. And ignored him. "You said you wouldn't become your father," he said that night in the ruins of the village. "I didn't," she replied. "My father would have killed them all. I only killed the ones who swore to Cersei." Jon stepped closer. "And if every house chooses Cersei? If the North refuses to kneel?" Her eyes flicked to him, sharp and tired. "Then the North will burn." There was no rage in her voice anymore. That was what made it worse. He stared at her. "You're not listening to me." "I am," she said. "I just don't care what you think anymore." He turned to leave, but her voice caught him. "You made your choice, Jon Snow," she said. "You stand with me or you don't stand at all." She walked away. He didn't follow. 2 nights later, they reached the twins. Lord Walder Frey opened the gates with forced hospitality. He offered bread, salt, and smiles so tight they cracked his lips. Daenerys accepted it all, then sat across from him with calm eyes and poison in her words. "You bend the knee," she said. "Or you bury your sons," Frey sneered. "You're no queen. You're a foreigner with beasts and savages." She nodded once to Jorah. By dawn, the twins were taken. No siege, no war, just blood. Frey died with his throat half open, gurgling on his last insult. His sons followed. The women were spared. Jon didn't sleep that night. He stood outside the main hall, staring at the river, hand clenched on the hilt of his sword. You should have left her in Essos, a voice said behind him. He turned. Arya stood in the snow, cloaked in grey, her hair wild, a dagger at her hip. You shouldn't be here, he said, surprised but not shocked. I was in the Riverlands, she replied. I heard the Dragon Queen cross the sea. I figured I'd find you behind her. He lowered his head. It's not what you think. She stepped beside him. Then tell me what it is. He didn't speak. She didn't need him to. I saw what she did to the twins, Arya said. You stood there. You didn't stop it. I tried, he said. Not hard enough. Silence again. She's going to march on the north, Arya said. You know that, right? I can stop her. No, Arya said coldly. You can't. The next morning, Jon found Daenerys already mounted. Scouts had returned. Winterfell, she said. We ride now. Jon's stomach turned. He rode beside her. The Dothraki galloped behind. The wind howled louder. By the time they reached the neck, a force was waiting. Stark banners, flayed man sigils, a line of steel and shields. Ned Stark rode forward with Robb and Theon Greyjoy at his side. On the ridge behind them, archers stood silent, waiting. Daenerys slowed her horse. Ned raised a hand. We don't want war, he called out. Daenerys didn't blink. Then surrender, Robb shouted. You think we'll bow to you after what you did at the twins? She smiled. I don't need you to bow. I need you to kneel. Jon moved his horse forward between both sides. He raised his hand. Stop! Daenerys' jaw clenched. Ned's face was stone. I won't let this happen, Jon said. Not here. Not to them. You're not in command, Daenerys said behind him. He turned. No, but you brought me here for a reason. You still trust me or you don't? She didn't respond. But she didn't speak a command either. Jon turned back to Ned. I know what she is, Jon said. And I know what she could be. Ned's voice was cold. I taught you to kill a snake before it strikes. Not hope it turns into a dove. She's not her father, Jon said. She's worse, Ned replied. Because she made you believe she could change. Jon stepped closer. Please let me speak to her, alone one day. Give me that much. Ned hesitated, then nodded once. One day, that night, Jon stood in Daenerys' tent, her back to him as she stared at a map of Westeros. Candles flickering like flames over the cities she planned to claim. I convinced them to wait, he said. She didn't turn. You bought me one day, she said. And then I burned through them all. He stepped forward. You can't do this, she turned sharply. Can't? I've already done it, Jon. I crossed the sea. I took cities. I crushed houses. I came for my throne. It's not yours, he said, not unkindly. Not if it costs everything. Her eyes filled with something, not rage. Not power, pain. I was sold, beaten, chased. I was nothing. Now I am everything. Jon moved closer. You can be more than that, she stared at him. Then quietly, are you saying I stop? That I throw away everything? I'm saying you don't become what they fear, he said. Be more than fire. Be more than blood. She stepped close. Their faces inches apart. You're the only one who ever asked me that, and I'm the only one who ever will, Jon said. They kissed. Not out of passion, out of desperation, out of hope, out of the last breath before everything collapses. When she pulled back, there were tears in her eyes. Sleep, she whispered. You'll need your strength. Jon nodded slowly. Stepping back, he turned away. She whispered one more word behind. Him, Dracarys, he spun, and the scream of wings split the night. A black shape soared overhead. The sky burned, and winter was finally on fire. Finally on fire.